You know, when you hear the term biohacking, your mind probably jumps straight to things like supplements, nootropics, maybe some fancy wearable tech, and that's all about tinkering with your body's chemistry from the outside in. But what if there was a completely different way to go about it? A method that doesn't just work on our chemistry, but on the fundamental programming behind it, using nothing but your own consciousness. Okay, let's dive into this and see how the source material claims this is even possible.
So here's our game plan. First, we're going to look at the biohacking you already know and contrast it with this new quantum idea. Then, we'll get into the nuts and bolts, the actual step-by-step mental procedure. After that, we'll check out a shortcut that uses sound and images, cover the absolutely critical safety rules, you don't want to miss that, and finally, we'll see what the future might look like if these two worlds actually came together.
All right, let's kick things off with Section 1. This is where we frame the whole topic as a really fascinating clash between two totally different philosophies for optimizing our own biology.
So right here we see the two approaches laid out side by side. On the left, you've got your traditional biohacking. This is that outside-in world of biochemistry, right? You take something, a nootropic, an adaptogen, whatever, and it creates a chemical reaction inside you. But on the right, this quantum idea flips that script completely. It's an inside-out approach that focuses on wave physics, using your consciousness to send brand new instructions directly to your body.
And this really gets to the core premise of the whole thing. The source material suggests that our physical, measurable reality, the world of biochemistry, isn't actually the root cause of our health. It's just the effect. The real cause, it says, comes from what it calls the spiritual level. Think of it like a non-local, wave-based blueprint. A master program of potential that's constantly telling your body what to do. The chemistry we measure is just the final printout.
So let's move on to Section 2 and see how this actually builds into a practical method. This is the how-to part, where the source lays out the specific mental technique it claims you can use to interact with that deeper level of reality. But before we even get to the steps, we have to talk about the engine that drives this whole process. It's something the source calls heart-field coherence. It's described as the state of deep inner alignment centered in the torus of the heart. Now, this isn't just about feeling good. It's presented as the absolutely essential state you have to be in for any of this to work. It's basically the runway you need before you can even think about takeoff.
And here it is, the 5-step protocol. First up, preparation. Find a quiet spot, get calm, and really focus your intent. Second, define F1. You mentally build a super precise description of your current state or problem. Third, define F2. You create a crystal clear picture of your desired outcome. Now, step 4, this is the wild part, entanglement. While you're in that state of heart-field coherence, you consciously entangle the problem, F1, with the solution, F2. And finally, step 5, manifestation. You intentionally collapse the process, bringing that ideal state, F2, into your physical reality.
Now here's a super important point. According to the source, this is not just vague, wishful thinking. You're not just saying, oh, I hope I feel better. This is described as a form of programming. You have to be incredibly precise. So for example, your F1 state isn't I feel down, it's serotonin at current specified level. And your F2 state is serotonin at optimal beneficial level. You're giving the system exact coordinates to work with. Okay, but let's be real. That level of intense mental focus can be really, really challenging. So the source actually provides another route, which we're covering here in Section 3. Think of it as a kind of shortcut that uses external signals. This method is called quantum resonance. And the idea here is that instead of having to mentally create that perfect F2 solution all by yourself, you take your problem, your F1, and you entangle it with an external signal, like a specific sound or a particular image. It's almost like these signals are pre-made solutions, already speaking the native language of that deeper spiritual level.
So why would you do this? Well, the source gives a few key reasons. First, it claims that sound and images are naturally wave functions, so they're a perfect fit for this kind of work. Second, their effect supposedly doesn't just fade away. Unlike a vitamin that your body uses up and then it's gone, the informational imprint from this kind of resonance is said to be much more durable. The text even suggests you can find useful files for this on common platforms like YouTube or Spotify. Now listen up, because when it comes to using these files, the source lays down some very specific safety rules. It really stresses that this isn't something to overdo. The first absolute limit is this: no more than 30 minutes for any single audio or video file in a given day. That's it. And the second hard limit is to use no more than 2 or 3 different files within any 24-hour window.
The source heavily emphasizes respecting these limits to avoid, in its own words, overloading your system. And that whole point about limits brings us to Section 4, which is honestly one of the most important parts of this entire explainer. We're talking about safety, limitations, and the very real consequences of misusing these kinds of techniques.
This quote from the text is pretty much presented as the golden rule. Man, know thy limitations and thy possibilities. The message is powerful, and it's crystal clear. Before you even think about trying to rewrite your own code, the source says you have to have a brutally honest understanding of what you're capable of, and maybe even more importantly, where your breaking points are.
Now, here's a really subtle but absolutely crucial idea from the text. Your own will is a necessary cause. It's the spark. You're the one who has to initiate the process, but it's not a sufficient cause. It's not the whole fire. The ultimate outcome, it suggests, is still subject to what it calls a higher, universal will of the absolute. And what that means is there are simply no guarantees.
And look, the text does not pull any punches about the risks of ignoring your limits. We are not just talking about getting a headache here. The potential consequences it describes are, well, they're intense. Things like overloading your energetic system, causing a negative impact on what it calls the soul, and even, it claims, requiring a long post-death purification process, which it compares to a purgatory, with karmic consequences that could ripple into future lives.
So after all that, what's the verdict? Is it all about chemistry or is it all about consciousness? Well, according to the source, that's completely the wrong question to ask. In Section 5, it makes it really clear that the goal isn't to pick a side, but to create a powerful combination of both worlds.
The ideal path, this integrated approach, is laid out like this. First, you've got the foundation, which has to be solid. Good diet, regular movement, enough sleep. You absolutely cannot skip the basics. Second, use supplements wisely to fill in any biochemical gaps you might have. And only then, on top of that strong foundation, do you start to apply these mental tools, not as a replacement for everything else, but as a supportive layer, an accelerator to help guide change from the inside out.
So, where could all of this be headed? The source paints this really interesting picture of a potential evolution. It starts right now, with individual practice and experimentation. From there, the next step could be developing standardized protocols, and after that, maybe even integration with conventional medical systems. And the really long-term vision? A whole new generation of therapists who are masters of both biology and consciousness.
All of which really leaves us with one final, massive question that this text just puts right on the table for us to think about. Is that hard line that we've always drawn between our minds and our biology really as solid as we've been told? Or is it possible that it's much more fluid than we ever dared to imagine?